Perhaps everybody's favourite topic from the pre-season games at Chelsea is the potential duo of Cole Palmer and Estevao on that right-hand side. So in today's video, we're going to be discussing Enzo Maresca's master plan, which involves Estevao, Cole Palmer and an outlet on that left side. Okay, now that we're on the tactics board, let's discuss why Cole Palmer and Estevao can have this sort of connection this season and why the rotations between them are actually so important, and not just on the base level of, because I think what a lot of people will sort of think with these rotations is Estevao's coming into the pocket, Palmer's going to play out wide, and because they're both functional in not only the inside role, but also as those sort of isolation wingers out wide in those 1v1s, that you can get good usage of them in terms of sort of rotating. And whilst this is true in isolation, I think there's a lot more to it. Now, yes, on the base level, Estevao, he said he wants to play in the middle of the pitch at times, getting him into these areas, having that freedom to come inside, connect with other players, sort of like this, in those triangles in the middle, as well as being out wide and pinned out there. It gives him that sort of license to be a little bit more free. With Cole Palmer, we saw it in the the Conference League final, that when he gets into these sort of zones out wide, he is also able to sort of isolate his defender with some really small, intricate dribbling and sort of bringing the ball forwards, but also backing into a defender 1v1 so that he can assess the picture. And then as he does in that Conference League final, he sort of rolls away, puts the ball into the box, and it is lovely stuff. So both can isolate themselves in those roles and do very good jobs in either or. But if we open this up now to the zones of the pitch, and we're sort of talking about, okay, we've got those half spaces where sort of Palmer and Fernandez, let's say in this example, you've got Estevao and Gittins as sort of those width players. And then what you've got here is sort of, you've almost got very narrow back three on the ball and your pivot. Now, this is sort of like the default of Chelsea moving forward. Of course, at times, if Sanchez is to step forward, then you can sort of spread that out and have the width covered at depth. But this is all sort of dependent on the game and where on the ball you are, the game state, etc., etc. But the sort of default we're talking about here is this sort of 3-2-4-1. Now, here's where the rotations get quite interesting, because what it enables you to do is sort of have that double width. Now, the width, of course, being this line here. If I use this tool just so you can sort of, that being the width. Of course, you've got lots of like mini subsections here, but the width being there. And what you can do is, because we're quite narrow with the centre backs on the ball, what you'd usually have with a fullback is you'd have two players occupying that width channel. Again, you can have one player a little bit more inside, one a bit more outside, vice versa, with the winger sort of there and the centre back or fullback a little bit more narrow, which you usually see in those build-up stages, which can open up those passing angles forward, but also just drag the defenders a little bit more wide, sort of at the back line, especially here, and trying to sort of stretch the back of the pitch. But with Chelsea being a little bit more narrow, of course, we've got the three central defenders here in those sort of occupying those lanes with the double pivot. What you actually end up with is the ability for the number 8s or / those number 10s in these pockets here with the likes of Palmer and Fernandez, the ability to drop in and create these sort of double width that we're talking about situations where they're sort of online. If I just do this quickly, they're on the axes between the wide centre back and the winger. And that's something that I spoke about a lot with Enzo Maresca last season, and how important that aspect of it is. What this allows is someone like Cole Palmer, as we were speaking about, we've spoke about that connection that he can have with Estevao. But what it allows for is these sort of movements where both of them can occupy those wide areas. Let's say Palmer drops into here, and as Estevao notices that Palmer's going to get on the ball, that can be when, instead of holding the width as such, and Palmer's looking to, again, he's dragging a man over from the midfield with him, he's came into this area on the pitch to get on the ball, and Estevao can now use that moment to drag inside, and he can either operate still within that channel, but at a little bit more of a narrow width, or what he can do is he can instead go into this area, and you can see these sort of rotations between the two on a very consistent basis. And I do think that this is something that Chelsea are looking to utilise on that right-hand side. And I'm going to explain why I think the right-hand side more so than the left, although we're going to see it on the left because we've seen it with Enzo. He'll still drop into those areas. But I think the difference is on this right-hand side with Palmer and Estevao, you have players that are so comfortable in both zones, whether that's wide or inside. Their technical ability is so key. And the players around them on this side of the pitch, you look at someone like Reece James, is another huge sort of tell as to how this will work. But also João Pedro, who can sort of drift over and be part of this. this is how I think Chelsea are going to sort of exploit this next season now. With the right side of the pitch, I think, I've just realised let's switch them back like this. I think that what you're going to see is a lot of this sort of triangle in here. A lot of the sort of technical ability, if James pushes up, and again, Chelsea are sort of pushing up on the ball, these guys are all pushed up. And these three players, I think, not only the rotations that they can sort of make, even this, for example, to get Palmer on the ball, but also just, again, those sort of quick 1-2 touch movements to drag players over to this side of the pitch. And I think you've got three of the most press-resistant players in terms of their quality on the ball and ability to either keep possession, penetrate and beat their man and go 1v1 out wide, or sort of beat a man in the middle of the pitch and create something really special, which is what Cole Palmer does a lot of the time in those central areas. But also, like I say, drag players over, because then we can speak about what that means for someone like Gittins. Now, if I come off of this, what I actually think is really key, as I said, is if Pedro comes over and you've got Caicedo here as well, all of a sudden, you've got this sort of net here with so much technical ability to keep the ball and sort of tilt play towards your right side of the pitch, that all of a sudden, once you can play through and you drag plenty of markers over, because again, you've got Pedro coming over, dragging a centre-back, Palmer's dragged a player, Estevao's maybe attracting one, maybe even two, Caicedo, etc. You've got lots of players coming over to that side of the pitch, that it will then open up for when you can play through to find someone like Fernandes. Let me just put that back because I think it will help to visualise what we're talking about. You can then find someone like Fernandes, and who can then give Gittins or Garnacho, because I think that's another sort of key why it's part of Enzo Maresca's master plan, is to have this left side be much more your outlet side of the team, whilst your right side is much more of the sort of fluid, connective sort of tissue of the team, as you can see here. And I think that João Pedro has a big part to play in that. And it depends on certain games, because, of course, you've got Liam Delap, who's a bit more of a runner. And like I said, I think there's loads of different ways you can do this. But I do think that this is a huge sort of part of how Maresca is planning to play, because not only can you switch the ball, say, from Palmer straight out to Gittins to isolate his man 1v1, but you can also play to Enzo, who's in this spot, which is another sort of key area, to have a connector in this area, so that it's not the only pass that you can play isn't just the direct switch. What you can also do is really quickly guide loads of players over, get it into either Cucurella or Fernandes, who can then continuously give that supply to the left winger. But also, again, if we're talking about Garnacho or Gittins, once Fernandes gets that ball, Gittins can also make that run into here to penetrate in behind. So what you then have is either 1v1 isolations on the wing, or you have your direct runner, and he's probably your most direct runner, because again, you've got all these players out here, making those runs in behind from the left side. And again, I think that's massively the plan for someone like Alejandro Garnacho, who's being sort of targeted by Chelsea. And then, of course, you then, from there, would have, if Gittins get into the byline, putting balls into the box, you'd have Fernandes joining, Pedro joining, Palmer joining, Estevao joining. These guys sort of ready to set the counter-pressing net with Caicedo, Cucurella and James on the edge of the box. But you've got all these players attacking the box. And that's how, again, you're probably even inside the box there. That's how I think Chelsea are sort of looking to play this season, with Estevao and Palmer being that really connective, fluid partnership, and Gittins or Garnacho on the other side of the pitch. Now, of course, this could be Neto. I think Neto can do the exact same role. I think the reason I'm speaking so much about Estevao is because I think this is the plan for the future, to have Palmer and Estevao be the sort of the primary and the secondary creators for this team. But of course, Neto, you think of who can come in and do that. And if Chelsea sign Xavi Simons, I think they can play into this part of the puzzle. So yeah, that's sort of what I wanted to touch on in terms of Palmer and Estevao. Let me know any questions you guys have in terms of that partnership. Like I say, this isn't to say Estevao's going to start straight away, because he's young and I want him to be sort of really firmly, no big pressure on him. I want him to be settled into the club nicely. But I thought we'd speak about it because I think the dynamics and what we've already seen in terms of just that 45 minutes we saw against Leverkusen, and also what we can sort of defer from all of these ideas that we've seen, I think it is something that is worth talking about, ready for what we could see when Palmer and Estevao share the field together. So let me know all your questions. I'll get to them in the comments. Drop a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.